Let's look at Australia, though, because their trajectory is completely the opposite of Fiji's trajectory at the moment. As much as you want to say they're a growing team.
Throw the baguettes at me, mate.
Probably know more about the Fijian players than the Australians. And is that saying something? Well, yeah, because we kind of understand rugby and we know rugby. And that is because the Australian team, there's a lot of new players in there. Yeah. And the superstars of years gone by and the high-profile players, no Hooper, no Quade Cooper, Pocock's obviously retired. Like these big names that are kind of synonymous with the Wallabies over years gone by, they're no longer there. And yeah, there are a few. Samu Karevi, people would have heard of. Nick White, friend of the show as well. Will Skelton, who's injured.
That was a big loss.
Talking about the game at the weekend.
About that game.
Massive.
That was a massive loss for them.
Massive. Because they lacked, and this comes onto it, they've got no power. They've got no size. You've got no fans. Like, that is a snapshot of Australia. They're really struggling for a bit of identity, size, power, and they got beat up against Fiji. I just still think, maybe again it's just because of the history of the tournament of the World Cup for Australia. But yeah, they were average at the weekend. Discipline was poor, and Eddie mentioned it in the press conference, which was one of the best press conferences I've ever heard. You're not on the front foot, you're on the back foot constantly. You're going to give away penalties. Yeah. So,
but a team
tough
mirrors
day at the office for Australia.
A team mirrors their coach, James, and Eddie Jones is very ill-disciplined in his press conferences and what he says. Come on a journey, mate. Well, if you don't know anything about rugby, don't ask me that question, mate. Yeah, go on, give us it. And he goes mad at people, and then that portrays onto his team. 18 penalties, poor discipline. But I just sit there and I think, and we debated, and you mentioned that they're Quade Cooper or Bernard Foley. He's taken Carter Gordon, who I think is going to be a hell of a player. One thing I'm going to say about Eddie Jones, and I listened to some of his press conference, he's talking about using this World Cup as a springboard to give players experience for a future World Cup. You've disrespected the competition. Like, you've disrespected the competition by saying that. And I get giving younger players experience, but he's basically half writing off their chances, going, we're not using this World Cup as something. Imagine if you're Australian and you hear that, and you're thinking, I desperately want to get behind this team, but he's like, it doesn't really matter, this World Cup, because we're preparing these youngsters for the Lions or the following World Cup in 4 years' time.
But that's big. But, Goody, that's massive for them as a country.
Because yeah, it is.
I know what you're saying, though, with that, but he has a point in that they want to be competitive at home against the Lions, and they want to be in a position to be winning the World Cup in 4 years' time. And if they carry on in the vein in which they're in, Hooper's not making that.
He ain't in a job.
But he must have had to do what he's done and come in how he's interacted with the media and come in how he's changed the squad and got rid of some of the highest profile, your captain in Hooper, and have the scrutiny that he has had and the history that he had with England, and to get rid of Dave Rennie to bring him in. I think he is very high up in that organisation in terms of making decisions. I think that this was a plan before. I think they're like, look, he's probably said, we can't win it. We cannot win the World Cup now. I'm telling you now, with experience in the World Cups before, to the board, we can't win it. So give me an opportunity to scrap the old guard, bring in the new guard, and let's aim for the Lions, where he probably won't be there, and the World Cup in 4 years' time, where, again, he probably won't be there.
You're saying he's got photos of someone on the board in Australian rugby, and he's using that as well, probably.
He looks like he's had enough, doesn't he? He looks like he's sick of it. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I generally look at him and I think I start to feel sorry for him a little bit, because I know he's created all this himself, but he's deranged, deluded with what he's saying at times, just ridiculous. And I don't know, I just think from an Australian point of view, if you're an Australian fan, everything he's kind of saying would piss you off as an Australian fan, because you're disrespecting the competition. Well, just the fact that it's like, it seems like he's not bothered about this World Cup. It's a bloody World Cup. It's the biggest thing ever, every 4 years. And all due respect, if they were in Scotland's position, where they're in a group with Ireland and South Africa, then you'd be like, okay, I can maybe see why. His pool is the supposed easiest pool that Australia will probably ever get in terms of the other teams around him in it. And he's been a failure. Let's be honest. Since he's taken over the job, played 7, lost 6, beaten Georgia, and it's all on this weekend. If he loses this weekend against Wales, which, being a quarter Welsh, I desperately hope that Wales win, he's got to be out of a job. Or you move him upstairs, take him away from the team, take him away from the coaching, and employ someone to be a head coach that can get the best out of young people. Because we all know, all the stories are starting to come out around how he manages people, how he conducts the environment, how hard he is to work for, etc., etc. No one enjoys it. I had the Danny Cipriani story about him. You know, we've all read it about him being a horny teenager. I had that confirmed to me by someone else that was there. That said it was definitely happened. They were definitely there and heard everything that Danny said was true.
Really?
And, yeah. And obviously Eddie Jones come out and denied it. So there's loads of stuff, and it will just keep coming out because that's how he's always handled his business and handled his environments that he's coached. And yeah, it starts off with England, started off on a big run of wins and got results and changed the narrative. It hasn't done it with Australia. So, and I said it a few weeks back, he's past his sell-by date. So if they lose to Wales, I think he's got to get moved aside or, depending on the contract, moved upstairs into a managerial role where he just gets away from the players because it ain't good for him. I'm telling you that now.
Well, let's talk about that game this Sunday because that's even bigger now, isn't it, considering the loss to Fiji? This is the big game of this pool now.
100%. 100%. And Wales, again, they got the bonus point at the end. Toby Faletau gets them out of a bit of a hole. There's obviously a lot of mileage to go in the group. Fiji have got 2 games to go as well, and 2 of the perceived easier games. You expect Fiji, although Portugal and Georgia have got the ability. Jim said Georgia are going to qualify for the quarterfinals, didn't you, Jim?
We said a lot of things on there, Andrew. You thought we're going to get smashed by Argentina.
And so it's a knockout game, I think, this weekend. And Australia lose it, it will take a miracle for them to get through. So it's massive. And, 2 teams that have underperformed for quite some time. Australia have gone backwards under Eddie Jones. Wales have definitely taken some strides forward over the last 3 to 4 months from where they were last Six Nations. That some of the big players will come back in. Dan Biggar's so important to them in terms of game management. The big players that he made a lot of rotations, didn't he? From the Fiji game to the Portugal game, Tompkins will come back in, George North, etc., etc. The big names will come back, and it's mouthwatering. It's a knockout game on Sunday. Can't wait for it. And either a big name coach could potentially be going home, and hopefully it's Eddie Jones.
On a side note for Pool C, Jim, could Georgia beat Fiji and shake it up again?
Yeah, not really. Georgia played Australia and got absolutely hosed, didn't they? So a little bit disappointed with Georgia.
You're a big fan of them, to be fair.
I'm a big fan of Georgia. I love the way that they play. But the thing is, and the frustration is the game against Australia, they got hammered. The game against Scotland as well, they gave everything in the first half, saw snippets of it. Their scrum wasn't as good as we thought it would be. And we've been talking up Georgia. Get Georgia into the Six Nations, like they're good enough. They're not, unfortunately. And you look at Fiji, what they did to Australia, look at Fiji, what they did to England as well. I'd be very, very surprised. I'd be shocked if they got beat by Georgia. I'm thinking of the game plan that Georgia could have because you're trying to pick snippets out because that pool is so tight. I think Fiji beat them comfortably. I really do. And I'll be surprised. And you know what? That's going to be the thing of the coaches to get them up, isn't it? That's going to have to be the big shift for them because they've had 2 massive games first up, and the emotions and the hysteria of beating Australia. Georgia are going to be desperate as well, and we've seen that with the lesser teams, no disrespect Georgia, with the teams that aren't expected to win, and they've rocked up physically and the framework's there, and teams have one big game in them during the World Cup. Yeah. But I'd be shocked if Fiji got beat by Georgia.
Pod.
Rugby pod.